Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to talk with you guys about why I feel like dips are the squats for the upper body. So let me put on my +5 hat of weaponsmithing, work on scaling up my crafting a little bit, and let's talk about this. Now, I know it's not completely true, because obviously squats work the upper body and the lower body. In other words, some of your upper body does actually grow pretty effectively from squats if that's the only exercise you did, whereas in dips don't carry over to the lower body, but in essence they are kind of like squats for the upper body in that they move the entire body through space, right? Under load, again, the amount of weight you add. And they work almost every muscle in the upper body, right? They work almost every muscle in the upper body. Now, some of them aren't primary movers, but they still get worked. And I don't want to say that the dip is the perfect exercise. I don't program it for everyone. I don't always put it in programs that I put out. Now, the reason for that, even though in a lot of ways it's a superior exercise, the warning is that, number one, it's not an exercise that every person is built structurally to do through a full range of motion. We get into this whole debate about the people cracking their sternums on it. This, again, comes down to a range of motion issue and someone who's really prone to that, people who feel pain in the center of their chest, trying to find that sweet spot on the range of motion, particularly if they're new to the gym and they're gaining strength rapidly, may not be worth it on that exercise. So it's something they could eventually learn to do safely, but they need to be a very experienced lifter. Again, if they have the issue in the center of their chest where they can crack their cartilage. And you can tell, usually when you start doing dips, if it hurts right in here when you go low, you know you're probably one of those people. And yes, there are people, quite a few people who have actually hurt themselves doing that. Then you have the issue with shoulder mobility and how deep you can get away with going. It's rather ambiguous. Now, I would say as far as that depth goes, parallel is probably your ideal starting point for most people, but a lot of people who are noobs to the gym are not necessarily going to know what parallel is without filming themselves. All right, so we run into range of motion issues and we run into programming issues because you have an exercise that does have an ambiguous terminal safe range of motion. Well, it doesn't have an ambiguous terminal range of motion. It has an ambiguous safe range of motion at the bottom, which means people can start cheating at the bottom. That affects programming. That's the reason I program the bench press more than the dip for people when I put out programs, because a bench press, you know where it ends. You touch the chest. You can complete the same range of motion on every rep, even as a noob. Even a noob can tell when a bar hits their chest and it won't go any lower, right? You can tell when you've locked the elbows. Even your first day in the gym, there's no ambiguity as to the full range of motion on a bench press. There is on the dip, and that creates programming problems as far as programming intensities, workloads, weight increases, right? Because if people can just kind of cheat the range of motion a little bit and be inconsistent, it can be a problem for people who aren't completely objective and honest with themselves when they're training from a programming perspective. But when you set those two factors aside, because those are the real problems with it, it's really a superior exercise. It's a superior exercise, and you might say, why? Well, because of the fact that it moves the body through space and there's a lot of stabilizers involved, right? There's an enormous amount of stabilization involved while using a heavy weight, and that's a big difference that we need to talk about when it comes to stabilization. If you're having to use so many stabilizers that it requires you to dramatically reduce the weight you're moving, that's not necessarily ideal from a hypertrophy perspective. Right? It's not ideal from a hypertrophy perspective or a strength perspective. I mean, perfect example, we go look at people who do pistol squats and these one-legged squats and all this stuff. How many of them who train that way exclusively can actually lift anything with their lower bodies? They can't. It doesn't build the muscle. Almost none of them have really big legs as you would think of. I mean, we can think of YouTubers right now who do that, and then they still have noob squat numbers after years and years and years of these one-legged squats. I'm not to say that these things don't have their sport-specific applications. There are definitely sports where some of these things might be beneficial. But for general size and strength, they don't compare with a barbell squat. They just don't. And people need to remember the barbell squat uses an enormous number of stabilizers. Right? It uses an enormous number. It's the reason it's considered to be the king of exercises by some people. But when you start going to some of this one-legged stuff, that's a perfect example. Or certain dumbbell exercises. That's one reason I'm like, I don't think dumbbells are all that amazing. Yes, you can get some deeper range of motion, but you get that from dips. But the extra stabilization required starts dramatically reducing the weight. Whereas with dips, when you start looking at the amount of weight people can get on a dip, you can get a deep stretch reflex at the bottom. It technically, in most cases, has a slightly longer range of motion than the bench press. But how much weight can you do in comparison? I mean, take me for example, right? I did my heaviest bench single yesterday, was a given amount of weight, and afterwards, later in my training, because I do dips later on, I do a couple other lifts between the bench and then the dips. I did dips later on, and I took the combined plates hanging from my body and my body weight, and I did 5 reps with what I was only doing a single with earlier on the bench. You do 5 reps with that, and that's pretty normal. If you do both exercises, it's not uncommon to be stronger on the total weight you can move on a dip than a bench press. Now, some people might say, well, why? I mean, there's a slightly longer range of motion, a deeper stretch. That should make it more difficult. It's because other muscles get involved. And generally, the more muscles you can get involved in an exercise, the more effective of an exercise is. Now, this goes in the opposite direction from the philosophy that a lot of people think of with the bodybuilding and isolation. I don't believe it's beneficial to ever try to isolate a muscle. Right? I'm not a fan of that. I don't see the point. I understand why people do it, but if your goal is maximum hypertrophy or maximum strength or maximum athleticism, it's the last thing you should ever be attempting to do. The dip uses more total muscles. It gets more muscles involved than the bench press. It uses the lats more, uses more core muscles. It gets other muscles involved, and by getting additional muscles involved, it allows you to create more force. Again, and that moving the torso, moving the body through space is a big factor. And that's something the Russians had figured out many years ago. During the Cold War, this is some of their research they had looked at, and they were trying to figure out why, but they noticed under their laboratory conditions that any exercise that moved the body through space, right, and that does count. A lot of barbell movements do that. You know, how about the squat? How about the snatch, the clean, the deadlift? Those all move the body through space, but so do weighted pull-ups, chin-ups, dips, things like that, right? There's all those exercises. But what they noticed is that exercises that move the body through space, that your body moves against gravity itself, not just the weight, seem to produce slightly better muscle size, strength, things like that. And their data over the years, right? That's what they noted. They never had a full explanation. They had a lot of theories. But I mean, to this day, when you step away you get away from that whole bodybuilding mumbo jumbo, you get to what real athletes are doing and what coaches observed. Generally speaking, exercises that move the body through space give you more bang for your buck. They usually produce a larger overall training response. Well, the dip is one of those. And when you really look at what all gets involved, there's an enormous amount of muscle involved. I mean, yes, it works the pecs. Yes, it works the front delts. Yes, it works the triceps. But it's an extremely effective chest and tricep builder. And when you start looking at everything else that it encompasses, it works your abs. It works the lats. You know, this is one of the reasons I point out to people, it's not hard to build big lats. If you're struggling to build a big back, it's probably because you're not incorporating enough big movements. Meaning, yes, I like pull-ups, I like chin-ups, I like rows. But if someone were to ask me, is it necessary to do direct lat work for most people to develop a really big back? Probably not. Now, to get bodybuilder big, yeah. But I mean, to have a really well-developed back, you might not even need any of those. People who do tons of other stuff oftentimes have really impressive lats. Maybe not the maximum they could reach, but they get pretty big just off of all their pulling from the floor, all the pressing and things that they do. So, I mean, again, your deadlifts, your dips, your squats, your bench presses, your overhead presses, hell, clean, snatches, those exercises will actually build pretty good size middle and upper back on their own without even going to the other stuff. And then if you happen to do the other stuff, you're going to have even more potential. You know, if you start doing weighted pull-ups or chin-ups and things like that. But it does work the back. It recruits an enormous amount of muscle through the body because it's having to stabilize the body itself as it moves it through space. And it's a tremendous overall development tool. And when you really look at it, it does have that ability to get a stretch reflex in the chest, dick, in the pecs that not every exercise out there can do. So it actually has the advantages of dumbbells thrown in, but you're able to move a heavier weight than you usually can on your barbell lifts. I mean, that's kind of a win-win. The downside, again, is the ambiguous range of motion and the difficulty with programming because of fluctuations in body weight day to day. You know, you can put calibrated plates all you want hanging, but your body weight can easily vary 5 or 6 pounds every day. That can be a minor programming problem. It can be a minor programming problem and hiccup, and then the ambiguous range of motion can be issues, particularly what's your safe range of motion for certain people can be difficult to determine and be consistent with. So those are the real downsides to the exercise. When you look at every other aspect of it, it really is a superior development tool to most other exercises for the upper body. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.